Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Chris Pritza.
I'm Matthew Wells.
And I'm Jack Reefe.
Today, we will be discussing how iPads have impacted the learning, student-teacher relations, and classroom management here at Creighton Prep. We will also hear from several students and teachers who have their own particular stances on iPads.
First up, we have an interview with Mr. Glenn on how he thinks the iPad have impacted his teaching and the students' learning ability.
What do you think the school could do differently to help students be more on task with their iPads or learn better?
I think one would be to have better faculty training, which I don't think was well done. And I think another would be maybe better student training in terms of how it can actually benefit their learning as opposed to just recreating them.
What do you think of the idea of how Duchenne doesn't let their students get iPads until they're sophomores, letting them learn how to study their freshman year with pencil and paper, as compared to just prep, giving them the freshman right off?
I don't think it would make much difference.
All right, let's pause Mr. Glenn's interview for a second, and I want to get your guys' reactions to that question. What do you think of the idea of prep could maybe incorporate what Duchenne does by giving freshmen a year to study without the iPads, to learn how to study with a notebook and paper before transitioning over to an iPad? Do you think that's effective?
I think I agree with what Mr. Glenn said, because that's kind of what us seniors had. We had our freshman year without the iPads, and then we had them after. And my GPA stayed the same, pretty much.
In my personal experience, iPads, when given to young kids, like freshmen, they aren't responsible enough to handle it coming into high school. I had a GPA drop as soon as the iPads were introduced, pretty substantially, and yeah, it'd be pretty beneficial to introduce it to them better.
All right, let's see what Mr. Glenn has left to say. All right. Do you incorporate iPads into your curriculum in everyday teaching?
In small ways, yes.
Does that help or hinder the way you teach?
When it gives them access to information or knowledge, then it helps. When it doesn't, it just gets in the way.
Do you find that students are off task more?
Oh, definitely.
How many of your students actually handwrite notes compared to those who actually take notes on their iPad?
I'd say it's just maybe 50-50.
Does their grade correlate with one or the other, just in general?
I haven't noticed it.
Have noticed?
I do require that when they use outlines for quizzes, they have to be handwritten in a spiral notebook.
All right, so it's pretty minimal, the difference at all. There's there's nothing crazy outlandishly different between kids that are using their iPads versus the kids that are just taking notes.
Well, once again, for quizzes, they have to write it, handwrite it. For taking notes during class time, I think for the sophomores in particular, the challenge isn't whether they use an iPad or they use a pencil, getting them to take notes, period.
A good take on the situation from Mr. Greg Glenn, but now we'll be hearing from someone of equal, if not much greater, stature in the prep community, Daniel Matern.
Hello, guys. I'm here with Daniel Matern.
What up, y'all?
Today's topic we're going to be talking about is iPads. Do you have a slanted opinion one side or the other on iPads?
In terms of game efficiency, I'm all for the iPads. In terms of school efficiency, I'm going against it. So it's a give and take. So.
It's a fair enough. Do you think the iPads have been more helpful or more harmful to your learning?
They definitely hurt me a ton. There are like moments of the semester where like I'll just sort of give up on the iPad thing and like start taking handwritten notes, and my GPA will go up like 0.5 within like a month. So yeah, they're no good.
I find that kind of interesting. He says he only takes notes on his iPad, but when he does, his grades go up. I know for me personally, I only take handwritten notes. What do you guys do? What works for you guys?
For me, I kind of bounce between taking handwritten notes and taking notes on my iPad. But I find myself, even when I am taking handwritten notes, I'll generally have my iPad out and open, so it kind of negates taking handwritten notes because I'm not really even paying attention then.
Do you feel like you do better on a test when you take handwritten notes and do handwritten worksheets, or like if the teacher gives you an online assignment?
Yeah, for sure, I definitely feel like I do better when I write things out versus like when the teacher will have us do a PDF worksheet on our iPad or versus like handing out an actual piece of paper. I don't know. I feel like I pay more attention when it's actually like a physical thing.
Yeah, I see that. How about you, Jack? What do you do?
I always lean towards iPad notes because I can type a lot faster than I can write, and sometimes teachers don't really wait for you. But also a circumstance of that is paying attention a lot less than when I'm taking handwritten notes. So it's kind of like a give and take.
All right, that makes sense. Let's continue with Daniel's interview. In an average 85-minute class, how much time do you think you spend off task?
It depends on the class. If we're talking world religions, upwards of 80 to 90 minutes. Not gonna lie. But there are some classes where like I'm only on for like 20, 30 minutes, so I'm doing pretty good in those.
Yeah, that's pretty average. Is there anything in particular you find yourself doing besides listening to the teacher?
Big shout to head soccer. That is one hell of a game, or one heck of a game. Sorry, excuse me. For those of you who don't know, it's a very educational game about cartoon soccer. So you should hit that game up if you don't have it already. It's great.
All right. Let's see. Would you be okay with iPads not being incorporated into the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't see anything they do that like we couldn't do on paper. I mean, I guess you could say like the whole like run out of trees thing, but that's a load of baloney. There's a whole rainforest somewhere out there, so just use that, I guess.
Since iPads were introduced in our sophomore year, have you learned to manage yourself better with 3 years of it compared to when they were first brought in, or are you just as bad sophomore year as you are right now?
I've improved a little, but not a lot. Like before, like sophomore year, I had no self-control. Like even if like I knew like I know nothing and I need to pay attention, I just like say whatever. I'll play games. Not a big deal. Now it's like if I really think I'm screwed, then like sure I'll listen for a few minutes, then go to my game. So I'm not great, but like I'm a little better. But
all right. So overall, iPads, good or bad?
oh, they're horrible. Well, they're great with games. Let me tell you, there's some great games out there.
Great with games?
But
all right. Well, thank you for giving us your time today.
Anytime.
And bye. So we just heard from Daniel Matern. So what were your guys' general reactions to what he said?
In general, I identify with most of what Daniel had to say. I've improved a little bit from sophomore to senior year, but I mean the same things that distract me back then distract me now. So they're just a constant nuisance.
Mm-hmm.
I know what he's saying about when there's like a big test and he needs to pay attention. I find myself doing that same thing, putting my iPad away, bringing out my notebook. I think that's kind of a big part of this is when we do really need to learn something, we don't use our iPad. So I think that kind of shows that we don't need the iPads.
All right. Do you guys find that there's a lot of kids off task in your classes? Like if you're sitting in the back of the room, can you see a lot of games or do you see a lot of people taking notes?
Yeah, well, I know in my physics class, I sit in the end of the row. Or I sit at the back of the class, and yeah, I think there's about 20 kids in the class, and there's usually about 17 kids off task, and the 2 or 3 kids that aren't off task are the kids with like 95s in the class.
Yeah.
So I think there's a big part in paying attention and how you're doing grade-wise.
Something I've noticed is that if a class is heavily lecture-based, like physics, then there's a good chance that no one is going to be paying attention. But if there's a lot of group work and integration into the classroom, then it improves people's performance.
So you think prep could make the iPads better by just letting kids work in groups, be more interactive with them, and not letting them decide what to use the iPads for?
Yeah, I agree with that. In my practical law class, there's a lot of discussion in class, and that's probably the class that I don't use my iPad the most. There's a lot of talking with the teacher. It's kind of a smaller class too, but yeah, being more interactive in class, teachers embracing the iPads more definitely leads to less off-taskness.
All right. Those were good reactions. Let's hear from Mr. Dave Lawler from Campus Ministry, and he's going to give us his thoughts.
Do you think that iPads have been helpful or harmful to students' learning ability?
I think initially I'd say they've just been different. I think there are some neat things that students can do with technology now. I think there's access to huge amounts of information. I think there's the opportunity to be more creative in creating, something like a podcast or a movie. So I think it provides some opportunities in that way. But I think there are quite a few negatives as well. I think reading retention is not as strong on an electronic device. I think paper still works better for that. I think there are a tremendous amount of distractions, and so I think it's very hard for students to focus with iPads. I can't imagine doing homework on an iPad with having notifications come in and I could just click over to the internet if I wanted. To me, it'd be very hard to focus. So as a whole, I think I guess my concerns outweigh what I see as the benefits.
So we just heard from Mr. Dave Lawler, and I think that what Mr. Lawler said is dead on what we've been hearing throughout our entire podcast so far. People are just not utilizing iPads to their fullest potential. I think Jack has a study here that'll shine a little bit more light on that.
Okay, so in a study performed by Pam Mueller of Princeton University and Daniel Oppenheimer of UCLA, participants were tested on both factual and conceptual topics of TED Talks they just watched. In factual recall questions, participants of the study performed equally well across both conditions, but on conceptual topics, the laptop note-takers performed significantly worse. It was shown that people who take notes on laptops tended to write more words on average, and those words matched up with the lecture higher than people who took handwritten notes. So with the results of the study, we know that students who took more notes performed better on average. So laptops and iPads have the potential to be performance enhancing, but unfortunately at prep, we don't take full advantage of that due to being distracted.
All right, and just as one final point to leave you guys off with here, we conducted a study over the last 2 weeks of dozens of students here at Creighton Prep, and we asked students to look at their battery percentage and see what apps were used the most within the last 7 days. And does anyone have any guesses what the top 5 would be?
Netflix.
Netflix or YouTube, probably.
Well, you're both pretty much dead on. Number 1, we have Safari with an average of 4 hours per student. Next up, YouTube with an average of 3.5 hours per student. Then Twitter with an average of 2.6 hours per student. Then Netflix with an average of 2.07 hours per student. And finally, Notability coming in at number 4 with 1.4 hours per student. I think that just shows it right there. Out of the top 5 apps, out of dozens of students, we found that 3 are not really school-related at all. They're more for entertainment purposes. I mean, what more needs to be said?
All right, thank you for that, Chris. This has been Matthew Wells.
Jack Reefe.
And Chris Pritza.
And stay off those iPads.